we're up to page Yud Beis. And we're up to the fourth midah of Micha's Yud Gimel Midos of Rachamim. And this midah is the Sheris Nachalaso. This chapter is a bit longer than the ones we've done until now. Rather than doing it in a day, we'll probably do it in two. It's not that long. It's just longer than what we've had. So, as we said then, page Yud Beis, and the Revis, the fourth midah, l'sheris nachalaso. So that these three midos that we've described before, Mikel Mocha, Nosei Oven, Over al Pesha, this is to be performed to sheris nachalaso. Who is sheris nachalaso? The Pashup Pshat of sheris nachalaso is the remnant of his portion. So the Pashup Pshat, the simple explanation, is the Klal Yisrael. That the HaKadosh Baruch Hu demonstrates these three previously mentioned attributes of mercy to Klal Yisrael. Sheris nachalaso. We're going to see that the Tomer Devorah is going to expand the understanding of sheris nachalaso to a different context, in a different way. So he says, Hine, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, Misnaheg im Yisrael b'derech zo. God acts with this fourth attribute as follows. And the point of the Tomer Devorah is that these are really Yud Gimel Midos of Rachamim, which means Sheris Nachalaso should also be a midah. But if you understand the Pashup Pshat, right? Mikel Kemocha, Nosei Oven, Over al Pesha. These are three hanhagos, three attributes, three ways of acting towards Klal Yisrael. But the term l'sheris nachalaso wouldn't seem, according to the Pashup Pshat, to be a midah. It's just telling you who these three previously mentioned attributes of mercy are being directed to, l'sheris nachalaso. But in truth, this is the fourth midah, which means that sheris nachalaso must be also referring to a midah, an attribute. The author, therefore, is going to base his explanation on this fourth attribute in a way which either departs from or expands upon the simple meaning, not to the remnant of his heritage or his portion or his inheritance, but rather in a way which is going to show that this itself is an attribute, not the object of the previous attributes, but rather an attribute of its own. And that's what the explanation is going to be based on. Omer, in the second line here in the text, he says, Omer, Ma'aseh li'Yisrael, v'hem krovai. God says, what can I do? What am I to do about Israel? V'hem krovai. And they are my brethren. They are my kin. They are my family. She'er basar li imehem. They are like kindred in flesh and blood with me. And therefore, he's explaining this term, sheris nachalaso, not in the simple sense of shar, meaning a remnant, but rather she'er, like it says, sheris nachalaso, where she'er in the Torah refers to a family relationship, a kinship, a relationship between flesh and blood. Yeah, flesh and blood relatives are called she'er. So sheris nachalaso then is describing an attribute, a way of acting with Klal Yisrael, which would be like a family member. Right? In this way, therefore, he extends the term sheris nachalaso to the remnant, meaning from the remnant of his portion, to actually family. Yeah, and that already defines a certain kind of attribute, a certain interrelationship, which is more in line with the idea of its being an independent midah, a midah of rachamim, an attribute of mercy. And therefore, God says, what am I going to do about this people? How shall I interact with this people, this Jewish people? They're like brothers. They're like family. They're kin. Shehem bat zug l'kadosh baruch hu. Because the Jewish people are like a spouse to God, like the wife of God. V'korla biti. But God also calls the Jewish people biti, my daughter. Achoisi, my sister. Imi, my wife. My mother. Kidepershu zal, as was explained by the sages. He's referring to different types of midrashim of Chazal, which are explaining the Shir Shirim, the Song of Songs, which is written as a love poem, a song of love, a song expressing mutual love, desire, attraction, appreciation between a man and a woman. But the Gemara says that anybody who understands it as a love song, as some mistakenly do, between King Solomon, who wrote it, and the Queen of Sheba, God forbid, that's nonsense. That's ridiculous. That's not what it means. The Shlomo Melech, who was the wisest of all men, was using the allegory, the analogy of the love and desire between a man and a woman to describe the relationship between God and the world, God and humanity, and more specifically, God and the Jewish people. And there in Shir Shirim, many different aspects of the male-female relationship are described. Husband to wife, father to daughter, son to mother, right? Which are all different types of love. A person loves his wife in a way which is different than the way he loves his daughter, and loves his mother, which is different than the way he loves the previous two. Each are very strong forms of love, but different manifestations of love. And therefore, Shir Shirim, which is an analogy describing the love, the special relationship that exists between God and the Jewish people, uses the love that exists between a man and a woman in these different contexts to describe the different aspects of the relationship between God and the Jewish people. In some ways, God's love for the Jewish people is like that of a husband to a wife. In other ways, it's like a father to a daughter. And in other ways, it's even like a son to his mother. And the sources describe these different aspects or manifestations of love according to more Kabbalistic terms. And in that line of explanation, the idea is basically as follows, is that the Jewish people sometimes are taking the role of daughter, sometimes as wife, sometimes as mother. And these three positions represent three different spiritual states of Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people in the world at any particular time. The first one is Bas, which is a daughter. The daughter receives her life from her father, of course from her mother as well, but her father imparts that seminal seed of life which brings the daughter into being. And as a daughter, vis-a-vis her father, she's basically a recipient. Like any child, she receives from the father, and she's taking and receiving from the father, but she's not necessarily contributing anything back. She's not necessarily doing anything constructive with the life or the energy or the resources that she receives from her father. And that describes a state where Kadosh Baruch Hu, like a father, is giving into the world and is giving specifically to Klal Yisrael, to the Jewish people, and the Jewish people are accepting this life, this light, this force, this energy, but are not necessarily doing anything with that energy. They're not necessarily giving it back to the world in any way, which is not necessarily a negative thing. It depends on the spiritual state of the Jewish people at that time. And just like a parent's giving to the child is with the idea that the child should absorb what's given, internalize it, mature with it, for the purpose of ultimately being able to give itself, but that initial stage of gestation requires receiving and not giving. In fact, giving would deplete what was received, or might express what was received in the wrong way because it would be given prematurely. So there's actually a benefit to, in a particular state of maturity, to receive and not to give. Again, in order not to dissipate what was imparted, number two, and not to express in a negative way what was imparted. So this is a particularly important stage in the development of Klal Yisrael. Bas, to receive from the Father with the intention of gestating that energy. Even if Klal Yisrael is in, let's say, a constricted spiritual state, where they're receiving from Hashem, but they're not necessarily contributing either, which obviously would be a higher plane, a better state to be in, Still, at least what's happening is that the Jewish people is receiving an energy from God, which makes a unique and preserves a unique relationship between God and the Jewish people. Oh, that's so-and-so's daughter. She's not known for anything that she does, necessarily, but she is known uniquely as being the daughter of such and such a person. And so sometimes Klal Yisrael collectively is in a state where spiritually they are not expanded, they're in a state of contraction, but still the fact that they are receiving the energy from Hashem makes them identified as the people of God. That's one state, that's Bas. The second state is that of Rayasi, my wife. Here, Biti, Achoisi, Imi, wife, sometimes Achosi, sister. Yeah. The point here is that a wife or a sister is more like a peer. The wife is a partner. The sister is a peer, a partner. This describes a state in Klal Yisrael where, spiritually speaking, the Jewish people are receiving the energy of Hashem, but they're not just gestating it, right? They're actually acting as a partner with the man involved, in this case, the Kadosh Baruch Hu, in a dual type of joint effort. And therefore, it's describing a state where Klal Yisrael is using the divinely imparted energy to contribute something positively and productively into the world. Yeah? For example, by learning Torah or doing the mitzvos, which is a way of introducing positive, constructive energy in the world. And we spoke about in previous sessions how that's kind of described as kind of meeting God in the middle. Right? Meeting God in the middle. This more proactive spiritual state, therefore, is referred to as Ra'ayasi, my spouse, Achoisi, my sister. Just like two members of a household, a brother and a sister, would work together to maintain the household. So God and Kadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael are working together in the same household of the universe to run the household. Or just like a husband and a wife merge in order to be involved in the productive, constructive endeavor of raising a home, raising a family. So the same thing, this merger is described between God and Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people. The third level is that of Ima, mother. Hashem says to the Jewish people, right, you are my mother. In what way can we understand that?
I mean, when you think of a mother, like think of absolute respect and appreciation. That's how normally we view God. But
right.
Maybe somehow.
In what way can the tables be turned? How can Hashem calls us His mother?
We fulfill His will.
Very good. What would that be? How would that work? How would that put us in a relationship of being a mother to Hashem?
Then Hashem would be appreciative of our fulfilling our role here.
Sometimes.
Okay, but
sometimes the son comes around to fix the roof. His aging parents. He comes back from the front or something, or back from the big city, comes back to the country, fixes the plumbing and whatnot. Oh, my boy's back.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so in other words, what you guys seem to be saying collectively is that there can be even, let's say, not only a proactive, but even a very assertively active contribution of Klal Yisrael's part into the world. And in this way, it's like helping, quote unquote, the aged parent, doing things for the parent, which would have the parent very much appreciate. Yep. Where in this way the parent becomes the recipient, and therefore the child becomes the giver, the provider for the parent. And this would describe, I suppose, a scenario where Klal Yisrael is pumping such a tremendous amount of energy into the world that it's almost as if that they're taking care of God's needs to a much greater degree than just being like equal partners. And this type of relationship is also alluded to in a verse which says Tenu Oz Lelukim. Tenu Oz Lelukim means give strength to God. Oz means strength. There's a verse was said, you give strength to God and strengthen God. And the Gemara asks, can human beings strengthen God? God is omnipotent. What can we do to empower God? God is all powerful. Any power that we have, we get from Him. We can give Him of His own, and He's all powerful. So the Gemara explains what it means is, certainly God is omnipotent, but God is not, quote unquote, able to share of that power fully into the world without us. We therefore give God, as it were, the ability to give to the world. How so? Through Oz. And Oz is also a reference to Torah. Torah is referred to as Oz. Like we say, Hashem Oz la'amo yiten. God gave Oz to his people. And what did God give to the people? The Torah. The Torah, a source of power, is called Oz. So what the Gemara explains is that through the Jewish people's learning Torah and praying in a very fervent way, they empower the all-powerful God to share of His power in an abundant way with the world. So in this way, God is almost like dependent on us to open the floodgates of His power and bounty, which is just waiting to be shared and flowed into the world. And in this way, we become like the mother, the provider for God. We enable, as it were, God to realize His potential. Just like a mother is really, right, nurses the child and grows the child, enables the child to realize his potential. And so of course, you know, God is the Father, but there's a certain aspect of the relationship, which is what we're discussing here, where the important part, the pivotal part the Jewish people play in the world is like a mother, which enables God to open up the door, as it were, in order to shed His energies with the world. In this way, we're like a mother. So we have Imi, Achoisi, and Biti. All of these three relationships are used to describe the relationship between the Jewish people and God. And the author here is using this idea to flesh out the way in which this term share is referring to a flesh and blood relationship. Yeah, the sheris nachalaso means that these attributes of mercy are expressed in the way that a person would interact with his very close flesh and blood relatives. And how do we find that the Jewish people to God are like flesh and blood relatives? Insofar as the verses describe them as being mother, daughter, sister. Yeah, that's the point. Uksiv, and furthermore it says in the verse, Yisrael am kiroivoi. The Jewish people are His close people, meaning His close relatives. The Jewish people are like His relatives. Mamish kurva yesh lo imhem. He says it's mamish, which means literally the Jewish people have a form of closeness with Him, a familial type of relationship. Ubanavhem, and they're also like His sons, like it says, Banim atem la'Hashem Elokechem. You are like children to your God. So he's bringing many different examples which kind of flesh out, like I said, the way in which the Jewish people have this special relationship with God. The truth is that God has a very close relationship with all human beings, not just Jews, with all human beings. And when we talk about human beings being created in the image of God, B'Tselem Elokim, it's not only referring to Jews, it's referring to Adam HaRishon and all of his descendants, which would include both that group of his descendants who became Israel, and also that group of descendants which didn't. So why and in what way can the author here emphasize the special familial relationship between God and the Jewish people as opposed to God and non-Jews? The answer, which is discussed, is as follows, is that if you have, let's say, a king or a ruler who has many different enclaves or, let's say, districts, and any of these particular districts might forget through time, based on their own, let's say, independence, that they actually have some connection to the sovereign. One kingdom can fall, another kingdom can fall, another district can fall, another district can fall out of, let's say, the sovereignty of the king. in order for the king to ensure that he has at least some foothold in the areas of his realm, he has one province which he maintains a constant vigil over, ensuring that they remember, right, his kingship. And therefore, all of the other, let's say, districts are certainly under his sovereignty and are certainly his subjects, but they come to forget that that's the case. By choosing at least one district where he puts the effort into maintaining this relationship and asserting his sovereignty, it acts as a way of reminding all of the others in the outlying areas that they too are part of the king's sovereignty. So the analogy is obviously clear, that God has a relationship to all of the subjects, but he maintains a special relationship with one group of them through which his sovereignty is exercised over the rest as well, in the case that any of them might come to forget or dissolve their relationship with the king. So too, God had a special relationship with all of humanity, but over time, people came to forget the king, one group after another group, after another group, after another group, and to the point where God assigned a special relationship, made a special contract with one group in order to at least maintain his special close relationship that was designed for all of humanity with at least one remaining group. And that relationship should be the catalyst through which God is able to restore the initial relationship that existed with all of the others as well. And in this way, we are called Sheris Nachalaso, the remnant of his portion. Right? What's the remnant of his portion? It's going to be understood in many ways. According to the way I'm describing now, what it means is the last remaining nation who really maintains the fact that they are part and parcel of God's sovereignty. This is Sheris Nachalaso. And therefore, that's what's being referred to by this special kind of relationship, which is described as being so close. It's described like a family relationship. In this way, Yisrael Am Keroivoi, and this is what we mean by God's making us a light unto the nations. That God ignites within us this light, which is like a vigil, through the darkness of the exile, the spiritual exile of all of humanity. But this one light which God kindled among this one people is a light unto the nations. It's standing vigil over spirituality for the rest of the nations, through which their spiritual light will be ignited in the future as well. And you see that's really what's been happening over the last 2,000 years, is that through Judaism, millions and millions of people, for generations and generations, have been ignited to the truth of God, to the truth of Torah, to the truth of mitzvos. Right? That's Christianity, and that's Islam. Their understanding still has to go through some fine-tuning. But by and large, right, all of that light was introduced and is continuing to spread through the world through being ignited by the torch that was lit by God through the Jewish people. So this is another form of Sheris Nachalaso. V'hainu l'Sheris Nachalaso. That's what he says here in the book. V'hainu l'Sheris Nachalaso. This is the meaning of Sheris Nachalaso. Lashon she'er basar, which is a term referring to a connectedness of flesh, like the family relationships that we were discussing. V'sof sof hem nachalaso. Sof sof hem nachalaso means at the very end, they'll always be connected to God. They are the remnant of his portion, which I was just elaborating on just a minute ago. Yeah? That there's at least one people that were chosen, because they chose God, to be that last remnant of humanity that still remains connected to him. Uma omer. And what is meant by what's said in the verse? Ima anishem hari hakevalai. What has God said? He says, if I punish them, because this is coming into connection with what we were saying earlier in the previous sections about the harm that we cause, the resulting punishment that should be meted out, the way in which in God's mercy it's withheld. As a continuation in that theme, he says, God, as it were, says, Ima anishem, if I punish them, hari kevalai, the pain is actually mine. Why? Because we're like one flesh. Since we're one flesh, if I punish them, I'm actually causing myself punishment. On a deeper level, this is connected to something we were saying in one of the introductory sessions, where in truth, everything is God. Creation is a manifestation of God. Human beings are also a manifestation of God, driven by the divine spark within. They were given free will so that there's an apparent separation between the parent and the child, as it were. But that underlying connection results in a situation where God says, if I punish people for wrongdoing, I'm actually in a way harming myself. Why should I do that? If I punish them, it actually hurts me. K'dechsiv, as it says in the prophet Isaiah, B'chol tzarosam lo tsar. In all of their sufferings, for him there is suffering. B'kol tzarosam, in all of their sufferings, lo, for him, tsar, there's also suffering. So God suffers when suffering is brought about by us. That's why he's bringing this verse here. And now the author goes into a deeper Kabbalistic explanation about this phrase. Ksiv, he notes that the phrase is actually written with an aleph. What's that referring to? If you look at the verse itself, the way it's written in the source, it's written as follows. B'kol tzarosam, in all of their sufferings, lo is spelled not with a vav, which means for him, but rather it's written with an aleph. And lamed aleph means not. Okay? Ksiv ba'aleph. It's written with an aleph. Only through tradition we know that it's supposed to be read as if it were written not with an aleph but with a vav. Meaning not, but rather meaning him. Okay? Lomar, and the intention of this is to say, Shetzaram, their suffering that comes about through the understanding in this context, as a result of transgressing, Megia lepele ha'elyon. It arises to a very high place. And this place is called Pele Elyon. What's going on here? There's a deeper idea here. It requires some concentration. Mordche. Yeah? It says, B'kol tzarosam lo tsar. Lo is written with an aleph. We pronounce it and we read it as if it should be understood as with a vav. But the fact that it's written with an aleph suggests that there is nevertheless a meaning here. Lo tsar. What does it mean? B'kol tzarosam, it's as if it's written le'alef tsar. And what is aleph? Aleph is spelled aleph, lamed, pe. And if you reverse those letters, you get pe, lamed, aleph. Pe Lamed Aleph is a reference to a very high spiritual world that's being referred to in the text as Pele Elyon. B'kol tzarosam, lo with an aleph means la aleph tsar. In the suffering of the Jewish people that's brought about because of transgression, la aleph to the aleph, which is Pe Lamed Aleph, the Pele tsar. Their suffering goes to this spiritual realm that's called Pele. Like we would say, Hi niflaas be'einenu. It is something hidden to our eyes. The word Pele means something which is hidden. Often we use the word wondrous, wonderful, to explain the word Pele. But it's only called wondrous because it's like a wonder. I don't really have an explanation as to why this is. And therefore, it's related to the word pele, which really means like a niflas. It's something which is hidden from our eyes. B'kol tzarasam la'alef tsar, in all of their suffering that comes about through transgression, that causes la'alef, that's the Kodesh Baruch Hu, that's the pele, that's the part of the spiritual realm which is beyond our conception. The suffering, our transgression, goes that far. Why? Why should God care? Just because we suffer, and particularly when it's because of our transgression, the suffering should go to such a high place, to places which niflaas me'einenu, a place which is so high in a Kadosh Baruch Hu that we should think, why should God even really care that we're suffering? How does it get there? The answer is, Sha'ar Nachal, because of our being connected to God in this family, flesh and blood type of a way. There's a spiritual family relationship between us and God that when we suffer on account of our transgressions, God is so negatively affected by that, as it were, that he has anguish over the fact that we're suffering because of the transgression, that it reaches up very high to that very high spiritual place. Okay? Where is that very high spiritual place? That's in the realm of the Spheros, which are the highest three Spheros, the realm of Keser, where there's the Rachamim. In Keser we learned you have the source for the Yud Gimel Midas of Rachamim. Since our suffering for transgression goes so far up into that hidden place called Pele, which is the Aleph, which is the place of the Keser, the highest realm of the Spheros, it stirs up the Yud Gimel Midas of Rachamim, which then come back down onto Klal Yisrael and mitigate our suffering, even to the point where we don't suffer as much as we should because of that divine mercy that comes down. All of this he's saying here in these very few short words. It's written ba'alef. Lomar, to say, shetzara migia, that their pain arrives lepele, the opposite of aleph. It goes back in that direction. Lepele he'elyon, the hidden realm. V'kol sheken ledu partzufin, and all the more so, their suffering reaches a realm which is referred to as the du partzufin. Du means two. Partzuf means face. The two-faceted, the double-faceted realm. This is another Kabbalistic principle which requires elaboration. And basically what it's referring to is as follows. If we said that lo with an aleph means la-aleph or the pele tsar, that our suffering for the transgression goes into the highest realm of the spheros. That's the keser, that's the chokhmah, bin, and das. That higher section where they have the good Yud Gimel Midas of Rachamim. If our suffering goes there, all the more so it goes to the area of the two partzufin. What are the area of the two partzufin? You remember our discussion of the spheros, right? We said you had keser, in which is chokhmah, bin, and das, and I said that represents faculties. Below that realm of the faculties in the 10 spheros, you have a lower 7 spheros. And there we describe those as attributes. We discussed that, right? Right? Chesed, Devorah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus. The 7 lower spheros. This area of 7 lower spheros is referred to as the Du Partzufin, the two-faceted realm. Why the two-faceted realm? Because after you've got Keser, which is Chokhmah, Bin, and Das, that's the faculties, you have the Midos. Yeah, the Midos, to which Chokhmah, Bin, and Das is mashpia, influences. That's comprised of 2 parts. The upper 6 spheros of that realm, and the last 7th. Okay, what are those? Chesed, Devorah, Tiferes, that's the second triad, that's 3. Netzach, Hod, Yesod, that's the third triad. Together there are how many spheros? 6, right? Right? Chesed, Devorah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. 6. After Yesod, the influence of all of that refracted energy, we were talking about a spiritual prism, refracting that divine light into its component parts. Remember I discussed how it's all ultimately recollected back into Malchus, the last sphere. That is the second aspect of what we're talking about. So the two-faceted realm that he's referring here to, the two partsufim, is referring to the realm which is below the Chochmah, Bina, and Das and Keser, the area below that, which is the area of the lower 7 spheros, where that area of 7 lower spheros is actually divided into 2 parts. The Vav, the 6 higher spheros, and the 7th, Malchus. 2 aspects, okay? What happens is, Keser in Chochmah, Bina, Das directs the influence down into the body of the spheros, much as the way we said the thoughts of the brain, which is Keser, Chochmah, Bina, and Das, right? Right hemisphere, left hemisphere, and the brainal stem, directs the thoughts of the head down through that channel, the body. That body has within it these 6 lower spheros, which are then drained into Malchus. Malchus concentrates them and ejaculates them, we said, into the vacated space in order to create. That's what's happening here. So you have the upper realm, Chochmah, Bina, Das, the lower 7, which has 2 facets, the first 6 and then the 7th. Okay? So if the suffering for our transgressions reaches up into the higher realm of Keser, all the more so it affects the lower realm of the 6 spheros and the 7th, which is Malchus, together the two-faceted realm of the lower part of the spheros. All the more so our suffering affects that. Why is that important? Because it's the lower part of the spheros, which are the attributes through which God interacts with the world. And therefore, if our suffering has an effect on, as it were, the upper realm of God's, let's say, mind, the mind of God, all the more so it's going to have an effect on the attributes, and therefore the empathy, as it were, that is comprehended, as it were, in God's mind, is going to be translated into the realm of action through the lower realm of the spheros. Okay? So this is what he means here, therefore. It's a very nice idea. The kol sheken, the du partsufin, all the more so our suffering because of transgression is going to reach to this lower area, the two-faceted dimension, the two-faceted separation of the spheros, shebehen ikar anhaga, through which we have the main manifestation of God's ruling over the world, dekarinan bevav lo tsar. And this is what's hinted at in the fact that that word lo, even though it's written with an aleph, it's read as if it's written with a vav. A beautiful idea here. Why? Why? Because it's written with an aleph to suggest that our suffering goes to the realm of the pele, in the keser, where the rachamim is. But it's read as if it's written with a vav. And what's the vav? That's the 6 spheros, which are the midos. To tell us, bekol tsarosam, in all of their suffering, lo, it goes up to the realm of keser, it sets into the motion the yud gimel midos of rachamim, and it's expressed as lo with a vav into the lower 6 spheros, so that God's thoughts of mercy are actually translated into action. And that's the duality of the lo, with the aleph and with the vav. The aleph is the keser, including Chochmah, Bina, Das, and the yud gimel midos of rachamim. The vav is the lower vav spheros, through which that rachamim is actually translated and acted upon to the Jewish people. Beautiful, beautiful. Uksiv, and furthermore it's written, V'tiktzor nafshoi ba'amal Yisrael, that God's soul will become agitated through the suffering of the Jewish people. L'fisha eno sovel tzaram uklonam, because God doesn't suffer, as it were, the suffering of the Jewish people and their embarrassment, meaning their degradation through suffering and sin. Bipnei shehem sheris nachalaso. And all of this is because they are like, God is like blood brothers. God is like flesh and kin with the Jewish people. And therefore you see how sheris nachalaso is an attribute. Why is it an attribute? Because if it weren't for that filial connection between God and the Jewish people, their suffering would not be brought to such a high place, which is the Pele Elyon, it's too far removed. Why would God care? But because there's she'er, because there is this filial relationship, the suffering that we have here reaches so high up to that place of the Pele Elyon that it causes a stirring of the Yud Gimel Midos of Rachamim, which is then set back down from the Lamed with an Aleph, low, to the Lamed with a Vav, to the Vav, the six lower spheros, through which God's Midos of Rachamim, our attributes, are then brought back down to the Jewish people to relieve them of their suffering, even though from the strict measurement of judgment, that shouldn't be the case. And just to conclude the idea with another beautiful kind of aspect of this duality but in the low between the Aleph and the Vav, is that when you read it, B'kol tzarosam lo, with an Aleph, tsar, what it means is that from God's point of view, B'kol tzarosam lo tsar. Even though they're suffering, they're not suffering nearly in the measure that they really deserve to suffer in terms of rebelling against the king. Yes? However, B'kol tzarosam lo, and with a Vav, for him, it is suffering. And expressing this duality where, on the one hand, as far as what they're suffering, it's really less than they should be. And even that, God has tremendous empathy towards. It's still like suffering for him, even though it's much less than they deserve. Yeah? Because of sheris nachalaso, the connection that's shared between them. Yeah. Very good. Okay, let's stop here.